Hello and welcome to another episode of the Slackware Arm vlog. Now in this episode it's going to be absolutely fascinating because I'm going to be looking at the installation documents. Yeah, I know, they're not that exciting. Well, actually I used to really enjoy writing technical documentation at one point, and at one point I wanted to be a technical writer, but I never actually got there. I did buy a book though, and I didn't read it. But but the installation documents do need to be completed. And one of the ones that's outstanding is the HoneyComb LX2 document. So my co-developer Brent has written the initial version of that document that I followed to install Slackware on the HoneyComb LX2, and I need to finalize it. That was the agreement. I would write the documentation and integrate it into the operating system, integrate the support into the operating system. So what I want to do now is make that installation guide that Brent's written more in line with the other installation guides for the Raspberry Pi 4. What's the other ones? Rock Pro 64. What's the other one? Pinebook Pro. And is there another one? I can't remember. I don't think so. I think at the moment that's it. I may at some point integrate the Raspberry Pi 5 support as well, but that does mean purchasing a Raspberry Pi and spending some extra time on it. But we'll see. We'll see whether that's something I want to do or not later on. But what we're going to do in this episode is have a quick look at the user guide and just see how we're going to put that together. Also, some of the user guides are, they're all slightly different because obviously they're for different hardware models. So there's some differences there. But I also like having a variety of different installation guides because they serve as references for future hardware models. The way that you can configure a hardware model on ARM it's different. You can install off an SD card. You can install onto an SSD on a PCI bus or one on a USB bus or whatever. There's a multitude of different ways of configuring the hardware profile. And so what I do is I pick out a what seems like a reasonably sane hardware configuration and then document that. So usually that will involve installing the OS onto a hard disk, for example, or some kind of SSD or some storage, some solid state storage, because to me that makes the most sense. So I will document that, and then so that's a known path that you can follow. And then if you want to experiment and do your own thing with it, you can then figure that out for yourself. But at least there is a known working path that we can follow. So in this episode, I'm going to have a look at the documentation and start moving it towards the end state where it's in a similar structure to all of the others. So let's go. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is locate the installation guides. So we can Google ARM Slackware and select what's usually the first link, which is arm.slackware.com. Okay, so then we click on the installation guides on the left-hand side menu. This brings us to docs.slackware.com. At the moment, there is no current release of Slackware AArch64, which is the 64-bit of the ARM port of Slackware. Eventually there will be a 15.1 release, but at the moment we don't have a release. So we're going to use what's called the current branch, which is the development branch of Slackware. So we click on that, and here is the current set of documentation, or at least current as of October 2024. When I'm making this video. So as you'll see here, we've got work in progress support, and this is the current installation guide for the HoneyComb LX2, and this is the one that I want to complete. So we've got the document here, and this is what Brent has mostly written, Brent being my co-developer for Slackware AArch64, and I've also done a little bit of work on it as well. Many of the steps are documented with screenshots and so on. The main thing is that where I want to begin is that I want to make it so that the installation guide for that one is follows the same structure as the other installation guides. So in this case, for the Rock Pro 64, the Raspberry Pi 4 and the Pinebook Pro. So let's have a look at the installation guide for the Rock Pro 64. We've got a video tutorial at the top, so that's linked there. And we've got a link out to the support forum. And then I've got a section about just really covering the installation life cycle, so you can understand what the steps are for this particular hardware model. Then we talk about what the requirements are from the hardware perspective. And in the case of the Rock Pro 64, we've listed a range of different options that you can, options with regards to the hardware that you can use to have a successful installation of Slackware on the Rock Pro 64. Because with the Rock Pro 64, you have to build the thing yourself. So you have the board, and then you'll want to have a heatsink fan and perhaps an RTC, and maybe you want to use SATA, that kind of thing. So there's a range of different hardware options here that you can buy and then assemble. And then we talk about the storage that you can use for the Rock Pro 64. So we've got a couple of options for SATA cards that we've used in the Slackware ARM build system. Okay, a couple of notes about storage. There's a little bit of information about what you need on the host computer, because in order to install Slackware ARM, you will have to download something. So there's a little bit of information there. Then we go on to the hardware setups. We talk about how to configure the hardware, what peripherals to connect. Then we talk about how to download the correct Slackware installer image. And in the case of the Rock Pro 64, we've got some bootware, as I call it, which is U-boot, which is the bootloader. Verify the downloads, how to write the Slackware installer to an SD card. Okay. Then we cover installing the initial bootloader into the SPI flash. Okay. Then writing the Slackware installer to the SD card. Okay. And then blah, blah, blah. Okay. Then booting the Slackware installer, the initial installer setup, partitioning the storage, and then, then basically running through the initial setup for file system creation and formatting. Okay, and then then we walk through how to install Slackware. We talk about installing the bootloader to the SPI flash, and then some post configuration stuff in the installer, and then we reboot. And then finally, once we've rebooted the installer into the OS, there's a bit of post configuration you can do, such as adding a plebeian user and some other configuration. Then talking about how to keep the operating system up to date using Slack package, and some other information here about how to adjust the kernel modules in case you need to, and a few other things. So the workflow is basically understanding what hardware and peripherals you need, assembling the hardware, downloading the Slackware components for the bootloader and the Slackware installer, installing a bootloader if necessary as a bootstrapping step, then booting the Slackware installer, doing configuring the Slackware installer, installing the OS, rebooting into the OS, and then finally configuring the OS. In summary, that's it. Now the thing is that I haven't yet created a template for this type of document. So what I'm going to do is ask ChatGPT to do it instead. Okay, so I'm back on the installation guides, and what I'm going to do is just copy the URLs, copy link address like that, and copy this link address as well. And I'm just pasting these into a notepad off screen. Okay, and then I want this one here like this. Right. So then I'll ask ChatGPT to create a template that I can then fill in. The first thing I'm going to do is ask ChatGPT to create a template in DocuWiki format. I don't know if it can do that, for a hardware model installation guide based on these 3 documents. I'm going to copy that in and see what ChatGPT does. Okay, actually that's not bad actually. That's not bad actually, yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, so then I'm going to tell ChatGPT to extract the information from the existing install guide and present it in the format that it's just provided me in that template above. Let's see what it does. I don't know if it can do that, but we'll give it a go. Save me a bit of work if that's the case. No, it's not. Okay. It's restricted from direct access. No, it isn't. Ah, really? Ah, okay, interesting. Okay, so Eric must have restricted the site to prevent it from being scraped. Okay, so what I'm going to do instead is tell you what. Let's log in docs.slackware.com, because I don't have access to change the robots.txt, but I do have access to look at the actual wiki page and edit them as well, of course. So if I just copy that into the clipboard, okay. So let's go back. Okay, below guide is here, and I'll just paste it in and see what it does. Okay. Okay. It's not bad actually. All right. Okay. All right. It's not bad. Okay, it's taken a little bit of the work away from me, in the sense that I haven't had to manually create a template for the high level, the key headings or the key milestones within the installation. It's done a little bit. It's not bad. I've got to say, it's not too bad actually. So I will use this, and then what I'm going to do is if I copy the code like that, and then go to here. If I create myself work in progress like this, then what I can do is eventually delete this one. How do I do that? Create like this, paste that like that, and just save it and see what it does. Okay. All right, I can work with that. The main thing for me was that because this is already here like this, it's just quite tricky to copy sections of this existing page and move it around. Because it's not a WYSIWYG editor. You have to edit it in the wiki format, and then it's a bit cumbersome to edit when you've already got an existing document like this. It's going to be easier, I think, to just copy the sections I want, put it into a new document, and then just prepare it in the new page, and then just copy it and move it all back into the previous, the original page, and then delete the temporary one. So yeah, I'll use a temporary one to do this. I think that should do. Okay, so it's 1 week later and I've made some progress. So this is the original document on the left hand side. So I've been gradually peeling away the existing documentation and merging it into the new temporary document here. And I've had a review of the Raspberry Pi 4 installation guide and just copied certain sections of that. So it's starting to take shape now. So we've got the initial little banner saying we're still working on it. The sort of header information here, introduction to the HoneyComb LX2, board specifications, a bit of the layout information, caveats, tutorials. I'm not sure I'll make a video tutorial for installing a HoneyComb LX2. I don't think it's necessary. Although there is one of me unpacking it and setting it up, but it's not actually a tutorial. And then so we've got the life cycle, we've got the hardware recommendations, which I still need to review, although probably not much. I haven't actually read this table yet at all. Brent wrote all of that. I just need to review that later. A little bit of information. Maybe I'll move this section actually into the table. I don't know, maybe not. So then we move on to the downloading assets section. So that's the firmware, the Slackware installer, tells you how to download it, how to import the Slackware ARM GPG key, how to download the Slackware installer image, verify it with the signature, and then we download the UEFI firmware, telling you which version of the firmware to download, verify it, and then we write the assets. On this document, I've not included really anything in the way of determining. It's more of a, if you look at the Raspberry Pi guide, Raspberry 4 guide, which is not on my screen at the moment, but on the Raspberry Pi 4 guide, there's a lot more information about how to determine, for example, what the block device is, the /dev/SDB, for example. It tells you how to determine what the block device is, so that you get the right one. But on this document, on this guide, I haven't included any of that stuff. I just felt it was a little bit too much. Yeah, maybe I'll include it later, but at the moment I just kind of want to keep it simple. Maybe decorate it with some extra stuff later, but yeah. So yeah, so writing the assets. Oh, I missed a bit. Remove. Oh no, I haven't. Right. So yeah, and then we move on to the initial preparation. So selecting the boot, using the dip switches to configure the boot source selection where the HoneyComb downloads its firmware from. Got a couple of photos that I want to take of it because I like having photos because it's actually useful for me as well in the end to remember where things are. Yeah, and then we move on to the installing Slackware section, opening up a serial console, and then we've got that's pretty much where I've got to at the moment. So it's 1 week later. I've managed to spend an hour or two actually hours doing that, and then I've just got the rest of this initial configuration to do, and then what is it? I think that's it pretty much. Then you just boot the USB installer, or rather the installer off the USB stick, and then pretty much you've just got the disk partitioning, which is unique because it uses you've got an EFI partition, whereas all the other hardware models presently use U-boot, and so there's no such partition. But other than that, that's pretty much it actually. The rest of it, apart from the bootloader firmware, or rather the writing the UEFI firmware, the rest of it's just standard Slackware install, which I can copy from, pretty much, which I can copy from the Raspberry Pi guide and the other guides. So yeah, that's 1 week later. Let's see where we are, maybe next week, or maybe even tomorrow if I get time. Okay, so it's almost at the end of the week and I've made some progress. So I have taken all of the text, all of the installation instructions from the original document. I've migrated it all into a temporary document here, and I've basically reorganized it, restructured it in line with the other hardware model installation guides, more or less anyway. So at least now it's in a logical, at least, well, as far as I can tell, a completely logical order that you can actually follow step by step, and install the machine. Well, configure the machine and then boot the installer, install Slackware, and then perform the post-installation setup. So yeah, we've got the physical configuration of the dip switches, the controls where the UEFI firmware resides. Talk about configuring remote access to the Linux box that you're using to do to connect to the serial port from. Initial firmware configuration just to set the machine up with the right config. Although this here might need to become ACPI. I probably should make a note of that actually. Tell you what, let's do that quickly. ACPI device tree. Why does that never work? Is it because it's quite irritating? Where is it? Device tree. Oh yeah, here it is. To check, maybe HCI with Linux 6.11. Yeah. Oh, you're kidding me. I bet that didn't save, did it? Because, God, that's really... Oh, it did. Thank God. Okay, yeah, because with Linux 6.11, well, we started playing around with it with Linux 6.10, and we switched on one of the build machines to, I think, ACPI, because there was some issue with device tree finding, I think, the SD card or something like that. So I need to have a look at that with Linux 6.11 when I get around to that over the next couple of weeks. So you do the initial configuration, then you boot Slackware installer from the USB thumb drive. So I've edited a couple of these images, these screenshots, and put, highlighted the menu items to make it easy to see. Boot the Slackware installer. I've got to change the screenshot because that's changed. The menu has changed since then. Installer setup, add a few screenshots from the latest installer. Disk partitioning, I need to double check that that's still actually accurate. I think it should be. I think Brent updated it a while ago, but I need to check. Once I've upgraded to Linux 6.11 for Slackware ARM, I'll follow this installation guide and fix it as I reinstall my HoneyComb LX2. But at least at the moment everything's in the correct order, at least I think so. So then we need installation. I'll need some screenshots and a few other things. Date and time, okay. Launch the installer. Yeah, and there's a few other screenshots I want to add in and just double check everything's correct. But other than that, it's pretty simple. And then fix these screenshots so you can actually see them. So they need to be redone, zoomed in, because you can't read them without clicking on them. So that's not helpful. Then finishing up, yeah, so then powering off, changing the dip switch config. And then the initial firmware, well actually the firmware, reconfiguring the firmware to boot the OS. And then finally booting the OS, and I need to add in some post-installation stuff like we have in the, this is the Raspberry Pi document. Where are we? Yeah, so things like, yeah, actually there's quite a bit to change in there. Yeah, things like NTP. Actually, looking at, oh yes, this section, I'd probably add this section in loading additional kernel modules, stuff like that, I think. Yeah, I'll add some of this stuff in. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'll add a little bit of that in, but I'll do that later. Yeah, that's it. And then reinstalling Slackware, because there's an easier way of doing it. Once you've installed it, you can just you can put the Slackware installer on the SD card, because you don't need the SD card anymore. That was just for the initial boot, because we needed some firmware if you didn't have anything in the SPI flash, which is the case from the factory. Yeah, that's it. So basically it looks like it's in the correct order. I just need to follow it when I reinstall my machine once I've upgraded to Linux 6.11, and I'll fill it in again, but at least now it's in the correct order. So I'm just going to take all of this, copy it like that, edit this one, paste that in, save it, hope that it works. When I save it, yes it did, edit this, delete that, save. So I'll now just deleting the content from the work in progress page, and then hopefully I think that'll wipe out the page. There we go, because we don't need that work in progress document. I've now transferred it all back to here. So that's cool. So yeah, this is ready to, it's still, you know, it's probably about 70% done, I feel. But it's at least now I can actually go in it and follow it and update it step by step or section by section. So it's in a good place. And I think that is a good place to conclude the video. So hope this was kind of interesting. It's not the most exciting topic in the land of open source, I'll admit, but it does need to be done. You can't have a good project without decent documentation. Otherwise people just can't use it. And so I firmly believe in putting the effort into the documentation. So there we go. Thanks for all of your support, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everybody.